Let me start then by talking about the title of the lecture series, because I imagine that some of you, upon picking up the flyer, might have wondered why talk about neglects of neoclassical economics. Why not economics in general, or why neglects? Why do we need to be so mean? Maybe why not talk about strong suits of it? Maybe someone could thought that it is because we think it's so extraordinarily neglectful, and probably to some extent some people would agree in it. Some people who will do that who will do a lecture, but that is not really like neoclassical economics is not really some extraordinarily neglectful in my view compared to some other schools. They will all have some strengths. They will all be good at looking at certain things and not as good in looking at others. And neoclassical economics is, for example, really some people find it very useful for talking about on-spot market transactions or talking about consumption decisions. Not so good at dealing with the production or behavior or the development. So the key point is not actually some of those weaknesses. The key point is that right now it is the only economic approach that positions itself as the sole source of truth for understanding the economics. This is quite a strong claim to make, and there are some exceptions to this and qualifications I'll get to eventually. But now I would like to explain it, and to explain it well, I would also like to explain what I mean by when I say neoclassical economics, because this might be a bit of a buzzword for some people. And definition is, there are some people who have different views about definition. But there is a general agreement that neoclassical economics is the economic analytical framework in economics which is underpinned by three methodological principles. The first of those principles is individualism. And what that means is that all economic phenomena are determined and can be explained by the actions of individuals who are autonomous from each other, who do not affect each other. The second principle is called methodological instrumentalism. What it means is that those actions of individuals are guided by their desire to maximize success in fulfilling their differently defined preferences. In human language, that means that we are born with stuff that we like, we hate, we want. And every decision that we do, what we make in our life, is to maximize our success in achieving the stuff that we want and minimizing what we don't want. And the third principle is of methodological equilibration. What that means is that economy is understood through certain equilibria, and the job of the economist is to find those equilibria which exist out there, it is assumed so, and research them or model them. Right, and those three principles allow in turn for constructing so-called closed models of the economy. What that means is, what the closed model means is that any problem that arises in this model, in the economy, can be explained by the variable within that model, not from outside. That's why it's closed. Essentially, any problem that you have, you can either calculate or deduct from the stuff that you have in your model. That, in turn, has allowed the discipline to model all of the economy as with the fairly simple mathematical modeling. And to present it as such. And I'm saying fairly simple despite the fact I really struggle to understand that stuff, but if you compare it to like modeling that is done in mathematics or physics or even by some other economists, it's actually not that complex. Right, so now for this lecture I'll be talking about two main areas in which neoclassical economics has monopolized. And that is economics teaching and the academic discipline of economics. And to start a story about that, I would like to start with what you will find at the beginning of almost every popular standard economic textbooks. So in the introduction, you will have, say, in Mankiw textbook, he will talk about so-called descriptive statements and prescriptive statements. Sometimes there is a talk of positive statements and normative statements, and that is essentially the same. And what are those descriptive statements and positive statements are, is about what is out there. And prescriptive statements or normative is what it should be. So one is about like how stuff is, and the other how we want it to be. And people can disagree on what they want stuff to look like, but the argument goes, we all agree on how stuff is, and you can calculate it and prove it. And the descriptive or positive statements are therefore deemed to be objective or scientific. And the statements that are proscriptive are deemed to be subjective or political. And now the political statements, the argument goes, should be left to politicians or perhaps the political science theorists. And the job of the economist is to focus only on those scientific statements. And therefore, what follows in such textbook is that, essentially, the job of the economist or the student of the economics is to learn the laws of economics, and then any problem that arises you can calculate using that, or even if we don't know some laws, we'll eventually discover them. They're out there. We just need to do some research and find them out. And the problems in the real economy don't really arise from our lack of understanding of it. They arise because politicians or people who elect them, don't know this stuff, or they don't listen to us, economists. And this is actually very problematic view to take for many, many reasons. But in case of this lecture, what is a big problem is that this view of what economics should be is not shared by any other major approach of the economics. And that is quite telling, because there's like over a dozen of them, and they literally wouldn't agree on that. Also, the key problem is not really that, there is some people agree with this and some people don't, but rather that this is presented as the economics, not as the neoclassical economics, but as the economics in such textbook. And you will be actually very hard-pressed to find the mention of neoclassical economics in such textbook. Sometimes it will present itself as the so-called positive economics or scientific economics, but it won't call itself neoclassical. And now the problem is also that this is true for about 95% of the departments in the UK in which you'll be studying economics. So by the time you'll finish your undergrad, you'll be trained only in this one approach, comprehensively. Of course, there will be some mentions of concepts from other theories, but usually they will be retrofitted in that body of knowledge of neoclassical economics and not presented within their own comprehensive body of knowledge or analytical apparatus or tradition they come from. Because of that, people who finish undergrad will only know this one approach, and they will also learn to treat other approaches or views as political or non-scientific. And I mean, you probably can find that in half of the comment sections under economists or the FT articles on Facebook, that in the discussion, those non-scientific so-called views will be often called, that this is a sociology or anthropology, and that will be used as a term of abuse. That this is not the real science. It's it's some fuzzy theorizing, and that to some extent it might appear funny, but that actually is really shameful for any academic discipline to do, because academia should be about discussion with people who have different views than you. As far as it can be justified, and here I would argue it is. And I don't mean to say that all neoclassical economists are like this. It's certainly not true. You have people who are neoclassical economists and who are engaged quite deeply in promoting pluralism and more views coming into discipline. And to give famous names, that would be, for example, Joe Stiglitz or Paul Krugman. The problem is rather that that this is institutionally embedded. And one part of this I just discussed to you. 95% in 95% of the faculties of economics or departments of economics, you will have people who would be trained only in this one approach, then they go out to become professionals, practitioners, academics. They won't know much more apart from that. The other part of this problem is that majority of economic faculties will not hire people from other schools of thought or traditions, and therefore they will be very rarely represented. I mean, you will have a couple of people, maybe a handful, in most of them. It's not true for all. I mean, I don't want to go too much into that. If you can ask about that in the Q&A part. But this has not been true 50 years ago, 100 years ago. This is quite a recent phenomenon worldwide, essentially. I mean, in all the countries that I know of. In the UK, this has become a case after a lot of the so-called heterodox economists, meaning economists representing any other school than neoclassical, were moved to other departments, largely in 1980s, largely after the conclusion of monetarist Keynesian debate and due to some political factors. And they started to teach in business schools, in management faculties, in geography, development studies, psychology, politics and IR, you name it. You'll have a lot of people who declare that they are economists who will be in those faculties and won't have much of a chance to go back. And this, among other factors, and quite important one of them is also very problematic design of research excellence framework in the UK, has made those people absent from the major debates in the economics, in the discipline, both in person and in teaching. That sometimes what you have presented in the standard economic textbook, as a settled case or something that is determined, is not determined or settled in the views of people who might have something very interesting to say about it, who are from different schools. I mean, this is first part of the neglects we'll be talking about. But before I discuss the neglects further, I would like to talk about some counter-argument from someone who might think, okay, but maybe neoclassical economics is really that good. Like maybe some other schools are just outdated. A bit like geocentric astronomy, right? Like maybe they're just old and they're false. I mean, that can be the case. But the problem with this argument is that neoclassical economics has consistently failed to provide good predictive power or explanatory power or good explanations for some of the major issues that are relevant today. And you don't, for examples, you don't need to think back that long. One is the financial crisis of 2008, which wasn't predicted by any the economists from the mainstream who were talking about great moderation at that time and end of boom and bust and whatnot. You can also think about the series of papers which led to the rolling out austerities in Europe and in the US, which were sometimes quite spectacularly rebuked and quite easily sometimes. I mean, there is a lot of detail in there. I don't want to go into much into that. Or, for example, you can also think about the focus that neoclassical economics often gives to free trade and to liberalizing some markets, and then inability to explain how the by far least liberal economy in the world has consistently over the last 40 years outperformed in terms of GDP per capita growth any more liberal economy. And I'm talking about China. Like, there is just no explanation that can easily be given within this approach for it. And so there's many examples of that. And also there's many economists who are heterodox who are giving very good explanations of the crisis before it happened, for example. And I know of one famous guy who actually likes to compare neoclassical economics to geocentric astronomy. He's quite a good mathematician too. So anyways, this I think shows also not the weakness of the school itself, but rather the weakness of studying only one approach to understand the world. And some of those examples actually bring us to the origins of the paper zero at this university. So the paper zero has been created as a part of the larger movement for the pluralism in economics, which was mostly motivated after the failure of the theory to predict and explain the crisis of 2008. And so in the first wave, you had a lot of student societies popping up in the UK and in other countries, campaigning for economic pluralism in teaching and in academic practice in the discipline. And the CSEP, which is Cambridge Society for Economic Pluralism, which happens to be a parent society of this lecture series, has been one of the first ones to be set up in the UK. It was set up in 2011. And since 2011, the movement has grown significantly. Now you have, for example, the network of such societies called Rethinking Economics, which does a range of fantastic projects and conferences. Those student initiatives were joined by the movements of academics like Reteaching Economics. There are also many. There is some pluralist press. There are quite a number of groups of professionals who also were not satisfied with the quality of economic graduates who are also supporting the cause. And and now the paper zero came into being as a part, this growing movement. And one of the major motivating factors for it was actually quite local. It was the survey done by CSEP students, which asked economic students and alumni about how they feel about the teaching, career prospects, and what would be their vision of the curriculum, like the ideal vision of their curriculum. And what they found that many of the sentiments of the students from CSEP were widely shared by the students and alumni. And this was, they had quite large, the sample, there was a very good response group, a very large response group. And I can quote you some of the findings they had. So for example, 85% of respondents say they would like to learn more about economic reality. So that's an interesting one. Or 81% said that they would like to learn more theories of economic and financial crisis. And then also an interesting finding was that between half and 2/3 of students have said that over the course of the program, students and alumni, that over the course of the program, they felt that their communication, verbal and written communication skills have either stagnated or declined. And between 1/3 and a half of responders said that the same has happened to their skills to form a structured argument or to think critically. So this is this is quite sad finding. And for those of you who start studying economics or in the course of it, I don't mean to scare you with this. The survey was noticed by the faculty, and faculty has has done some improvements in the right direction. But in the meantime, this was one of the motives for CSEP students to found this lecture series. And the idea was that, thinking back to the title, that given how economics is being taught, is being focused only on neoclassical economics, it is important to think what things are neglected, what things are out there that we can learn from, widening our vision to some extent, turning to other theories, but also other disciplines. And so now let me talk about what sort of topics you can expect from coming here. So as you probably have guessed by some things that I was saying before, some of the topics here will be what other theories, or analytical frameworks, like post-Keynesian or Minskian within post-Keynesian, or maybe Marxian, or some other schools of thought, are good with dealing with, and what they can learn, what they can teach us about the economy in general. But also the other big part of it, and that's why is to bring other disciplines in, and that's why I mentioned that this is not only about neoclassical economics; it's actually about economy in general. And so you can expect speakers from sociology, philosophy, development studies, land economy. Who do we also have? Education. Like there will be mechanical. Some people from mechanical engineering want to come for a land term. So there is really a lot of stuff out there. And when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. Thinking to some cases of great economists. If you think about Adam Smith or Keynes, they were trained in the range of other social studies to really wide degree. Politics, philosophy, or other moral sciences. Then when you think about people like Hayek, for example, he was well trained in, or he knew very well, biological theory and evolutionary theory within it. And today some of the very exciting criticism of Hayek also come from people who know evolutionary theory quite well. Then when you think about people like Thorstein Veblen, the father of original institutional economics, he was also acquainted with the range of different disciplines, notably with anthropology, which informed him very strongly. And then the father of so-called new institutional economics, Douglas North, was trained in history. And then Daniel Kahneman, who got so-called Nobel Prize in economics, actually said in one of the conferences I've been to that he never read economic textbook in his life. And you have, as his work has become known to economists, all of a sudden you have a new school of economics, the behavioral economics. When I think about what possibilities are out there, when you kind of just think what other disciplines can bring, it gets me very inspired. Like, some more sociology or politics or whatever. So, so that's this part. And also thinking in terms of how are we doing it. So maybe slightly technical part, but not too much. We'll be bringing every week a PhD student at some department, and or some people who have just graduated, who'll be talking, about their field of expertise or the topic they're passionate about and they've researched. In such way that no matter what your level of economic education, you should be able to get it. We're meeting them beforehand and we're making sure of that. So that's one important factor. And actually also thinking about this principle of bringing students in, I find it personally very valuable, because this place, the University of Cambridge, is famous for people learning on their own and from each other. So it's not famous for very rigorous teaching or stuff like that, by people just talking to each other, going to the pub and then getting a Nobel Prize. And you have a proof of that on the wall of the Eagle pub, right? I don't know whether some of you seen it. There is the plate commemorating the discovery of DNA. So the strand. So the double helix. So that happens. And this is something I think that should be discouraged, right? Just not being fed some of the stuff, but kind of talking to people, getting to know what people in the area, other areas know about it, about the areas, what they can teach us about understanding the economy. And because like thinking about those examples I gave earlier, I mean, it seems that whenever, sometimes economists shut up and actually take seriously what people from other disciplines do, they all of a sudden they can create a whole new body of knowledge about the economics, behavioral economics. You just thought, oh, actually people behave it that way. How interesting! Like, did always sociology know about it? That's fantastic. So. So I mean, this is what we would also like to encourage, and I hope this will also encourage some people to think critically, about maybe some of the topics that you are taught, maybe some of the topics you research yourself, and also about the topics we'll be presenting here. Like, I can be unhappy with some of the stuff that this economist or some other economists say, and I might say I disagree. But they might be right? I might be wrong in that regard. So if you'll give me good questions for my lecture, I might say, well, actually, I learned something. I don't know this. So, and that's great. I mean, that's also what we encourage. Now to the other technicalities. All the lectures will be recorded. Now let me just take a moment to find new term card. Since the one that you might have seen on the poster or flyer have been updated. Is it on the website, Nico? Or okay. And also another technicality. This is the co-organizer of the series, Nico Valenzuela from Land Economy. He's much smarter than I am. That's why I'm giving a lecture. And in the meantime, well, I'll just go through the topics quite quickly, but also I wanted to mention to you guys that the lecture series is only this lecture series is only part of what CSEP is doing and of events in similar vein. And for example, tonight there is a first event of a term organized by CSEP, and that is it talks about economics 10 years after the crash. What happened to financial sector, did anything change and what changed, and what can we expect with a guy who is a director of New Economic Knowledge Services. So I mean, he's essentially practitioner in knowledge creation in private sector. So if anyone knows how it is, then he will, and that's Henry Leveson Gower. And it's happening at the Lecture Theatre 1, 8 Mill Lane, 5:30 to 7 p.m. And you can find it on the CSEP website if you go on Facebook to check CSEP Facebook. So please do that. I mean, it's going to be very interesting. All right. So, am I looking at the right? Yeah. Okay, cool. So as you can see, some of the stuff on the term card was quite simple. So, I mean, simplified titles. So here we have titles and some descriptions of the lectures that we're going to have. So next week, we're going to have actually the Gustavo Nicolas Paez from Faculty of Economics. He's a very good lecturer. I mean, I really enjoyed his lecture last year. Who's going to be talking about actually one of the fundamental assumptions of the Neoclassical Economics, like the obsession with equilibrium, as you can read here, and how did it historically appear there, and why there is not more focus on dynamic outcomes. Then we'll have 1 week later the lecture on institutions and economic development, and my friend from the department, Sam Van Noort, will come and he will be talking about the literature on institutions that is quite new to the neoclassical. I mean, now it's called new institutionalist economics, but it's part of the neoclassical synthesis, let's say. Taxonomy can be sometimes tricky, but let's say so. And that it focuses on the private property rights, and that historically, if you have good protection of private property, then you're great. You're going to be rich in 2017. And it's he says, it might be a bit more complicated than this. then I'm gonna come here again and lecture on industrial policy in 21st century. And I mean, this has been a topic that was something quite important historically for countries to get rich, but many people argue that no more in the age of globalization, and I'll think hard about it and I'll come up with some rebuttal to it, or maybe agreement. So I'll be talking about that. Then we'll have Ellen Quigley from the Faculty of Education, and maybe some of you have heard about her. She led the investment campaign at this university, and those guys were really successful. And so she will be talking about this in some more theoretical terms, and how ethical investment can be done in practice. So I would take a note. She's actually someone who has done a lot of stuff and been successful, not like some other economists here yet. And then there will be the topic about, we'll have a guest from the Department of Sociology talking about social relationships and what can they add to our understanding of the economy. Then Nico will give a presentation about inequality and technological innovation. So yeah, I can see a lot of interesting potential here for cases of Luddites. I don't know whether you'll be discussing that, for example, or and what is the link between those two topics? I mean, both seem key. Like inequality has become a topic of interest for the discipline quite recently. I mean, for the mainstream of the discipline quite recently. But the technological innovation was a buzzword for how you become rich and richer than rich. So we'll see how it is connected to how those two are connected. And the last will be on the role of the firms in developing a knowledge-based economy. And there, my friend from the department, Grace Bhaskaran, will be talking about how firms are crucial to creating so-called knowledge economy, to moving to high productivity sectors, in transferring information and skills, training workers. And she'll give quite interesting cases. This is actually, is it new or is it? It's okay. So there is also an updated description. It's going to be online probably today, and she'll be talking about quite interesting cases. And actually, so there will be Japan and USSR as well. And what was the other? South Africa and UK. Cool. So that's also should be quite a cool lecture, and that will be the last of this term. We'll have a new term. We'll have some more lectures in the next term. We're still figuring this out. We'll still have some more application coming in. So look forward to this as well. All right. I think that's everything I wanted to say. If there is nothing to add, Nico, do you think?
Maybe the attendance.
Oh, right. So there's a tradition for Paper Zero that if you have attended 50% or more of the lectures, you'll get a certificate of completing Paper Zero, and this certificate will open you any door in the future. So, just come. It's worth it, seriously. So just do that. Anyways, we have about 10-15 minutes for any questions that you may have, and that's it from me. Thank you. No questions? No. No one wants to know what are the other 12 odd schools of economics or some other things? I don't know. Okay, there is a question there.
Maybe to open up a conversation, I wanted to know what is your take on, when you talk about economics pluralism, about these charges of economic imperialism, for instance, the idea that economists are sort of taking over other fields of knowledge. For instance, I come from a background in law, and law and economics is a recent example of economists basically taking over a whole area which has traditionally been and has developed an autonomous conceptual framework, and all that gets discarded by economists.
So just to repeat to people who are in the back, the questions about economic imperialism and other disciplines. And I mean, this is a topic for which you can make a lecture series, but I mean, broadly, you are correct. And there is a tendency, and there have been a tendency, especially since, actually it started with law, as you said, mostly, especially since the theories of Gary Becker, who later became a laureate for so-called economic Nobel Prize, who was modeling behavior of criminals in terms of their of the instrumental rationality. So he would say, when you murder your wife, you kind of add the benefits of murdering her times the risk of you getting caught, or you not getting caught, and then you would the cost of it would be the possibility of getting caught, and how long would your prison sentence be. And when you murder your wife, you kind of do that calculation and you decide, okay, it's worth it, I'll go for it, or not. And so this was this sort of thinking. Maybe I'm being too extreme in this example, but this was kind of the framework. And this is because there have been, largely in neoclassical economics actually, a focus not on the subject matter, so not on the economy. So economics was not defined as the study of the economy. Economics was defined as the study of using scarce means to achieve unlimited wants, or as much of unlimited wants as we can, as I'm paraphrasing the definition by Lionel Robbins. So then you had a quite wide literature starting from Gary Becker, talking, actually economics can explain everything, talking like every behavior, because everyone is rational. You always, in your every decision, you think about these things. So it was applied across different fields. So it was more cognitive science. This sort of literature was more cognitive science. I mean, you have stuff like free economics, some I have heard about it. But there are more examples. Or there was economics for the choice of marriage. It has nothing really that much to do with economics, but it was said, there is a market for your wives or husbands, and you need to do this economic calculus to determine who's gonna be the best husband. I mean, come on. It's so there was a trend like that, and I think the good rebuttal to it, when you think about it, the economics shouldn't, it comes from this definition, and sometimes when you think about it, economics should be just the study of the economy, right? Not study of marriages. Like, let's leave, that is cognitive science of marriage, that can be one approach to explain it. And actually it's quite rich to do that when you can't predict financial crisis, like, that's your home field, and you can't deal with it. So why do you say that you can explain much better than anyone else, like how people marry or why people, commit crimes? I mean, I would say there is also some benefits with that approach of analyzing it. Obviously, the risk is an important factor, etc., but it's just not enough. That cannot be sole basis for formulating law. And often economists have been not acquainted well with what other theories were saying. And on the other hand, when they sometimes listened seriously to what other people are saying, they learned quite a lot. Examples in case Veblen, the behavioral school. Some other questions? No? Okay. Then class dismissed. I hope I'll see you next week then. Thank you for coming.